He said she was everything I wasn't. Prettier, younger, more exciting. I didn't fight, I didn't cry. I just smiled, packed my bags, and left. But what he didn't know was that the best part of his world still belonged to me, and I was about to take it all back. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone's ever thought you were replaceable, then you know how sweet justice tastes. Subscribe now, hit that like button, and stay until the end, because this isn't just a breakup story. It's about turning heartbreak into the ultimate victory. Let's begin. I met Daniel when I was 23. Back then, he was everything I thought I wanted: tall, charming, the kind of man who made every waitress blush when he ordered coffee. He had that smile that seemed to say, "I've already won you over." And I guess he had. I wasn't some hopeless romantic waiting for a man to save me. I had my own career in graphic design, my own apartment, my own life. But when Daniel came into the picture, he didn't just enter my life. He took up space in it. He filled the room with his confidence, his stories, his ambitions. At first, it felt intoxicating. He talked about starting his own business, traveling to Europe, buying a big house with a wraparound porch. I believed in him. I believed for him. Whenever he doubted himself, I was there to remind him of what he could be. And for 3 years, that was my role: his motivator, his partner, the one who made sure his dreams didn't die on the vine. But here's the thing no one warns you about. When you keep pouring into someone else's cup without them pouring into yours, one day you wake up empty. It started subtly. He'd cancel date nights because he was too tired or too busy. He stopped asking about my projects, my clients. I'd come home excited about landing a new contract, and he'd barely look up from his phone. Instead, he'd talk about her. Her name was Melissa. She was a new hire at his company, bubbly, 21, still in college, with that fresh eagerness to please that I recognized all too well. I laughed it off at first because he'd always been friendly with people. But soon, her name slipped into every conversation. "She's so smart for her age. She's really creative, reminds me of you, when we first met." That last one stung. When we first met. Like I'd become something dull and unremarkable since then. The night it all broke open was a Thursday. I'd made his favorite, roast chicken with garlic mashed potatoes, and waited until almost 9 for him to come home. When he finally walked in, he didn't kiss me hello. He didn't even sit down. He just stood there, shifting his weight like he was about to say something rehearsed. "I don't think this is working anymore," he said. I laughed, because it was so absurd. "You're kidding." He wasn't. He told me Melissa got him in ways I didn't anymore. She was exciting. She made him feel alive again. And then, the dagger, he said she was everything I wasn't. In that moment, my heart didn't just break. It calcified. I felt every ounce of love drain out of me, leaving something cold, sharp, and precise in its place. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I just asked one question. "Are you sure?" When he nodded, I smiled. A small, tight smile. And then I said, "Okay." What he didn't know was that over the years, we'd built more than a relationship. We'd built a life. And some of the most valuable pieces of that life, his most prized possessions, his most important connections, were tied to me. If he thought he could walk away clean, he was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. I left that night without another word. I packed a suitcase, grabbed my laptop, and slipped out while he was in the shower. But I didn't just take clothes, I took my leverage. Daniel's business? Half of his initial client base had come from my network. His prized vintage car? Registered under my name because he couldn't get insurance on it when he first bought it. His dream house fund? Sitting in a joint account I controlled because I was the one good with money. And Melissa? She didn't have a clue who she was up against. The first night away from Daniel was oddly quiet. Not the soul-crushing kind of quiet you might expect after a breakup, but the kind that hums with possibility. I stayed at my friend Laura's apartment, curled up on her couch with a glass of wine. She didn't ask questions, not yet. She just slid the blanket over my legs and let me sit in silence, staring at the city lights through her window. Because while my heart had been bruised, my mind was crystal clear. I wasn't thinking about how much I loved him. I was thinking about how much I'd given him and how easily he'd tossed it aside. And if Daniel thought I'd just let him waltz into the sunset with Melissa while keeping everything I helped him build, oh, he was about to be very, very wrong. Our dream house fund was sitting in a joint savings account, and technically, that account required both signatures for withdrawals. But here's the thing, Daniel never bothered to read the fine print. We had linked the account to my personal checking when we opened it, just in case we needed emergency access. I logged in, transferred every last cent into my account, and left a single, mocking balance. 1 cent. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. That vintage Mustang he loved so much? The one he polished every Sunday like it was some sacred ritual? It was my name on the registration and the insurance policy. He used my credit when he bought it because his score was too low at the time. I called my insurance agent and canceled the policy. 2 days later, I had the car towed to a storage facility under my control. I left him the courtesy of a text. Your car's safe. I'll let you know when I decide what to do with it. This was the one that would sting the most. Daniel's business had been my pet project as much as his. I had built his website, designed his marketing materials, and most importantly, connected him with half of his top-paying clients. I reached out to those clients personally, explaining, in the most professional, calm tone possible, that I was no longer affiliated with Daniel's company. I let them know I was available for freelance design work directly, at competitive rates, and with better turnaround times. Let's just say loyalty has limits when people's money is involved. Within a week, Daniel had lost 3 major contracts. I didn't hear from him for the first few days. I knew he was busy basking in the honeymoon glow of his shiny new relationship. But when the financial ripples started hitting, my phone lit up. Daniel, what the hell did you do? Me, just tying up loose ends. Daniel, you can't just take the money. Me, actually, I can. And I did. Read the account agreement. I could almost hear the vein popping in his forehead through the silence that followed. I'm not usually one for public drama, but I wanted Melissa to understand exactly what she'd stepped into. Not through direct confrontation. No, that would give them too much satisfaction. Instead, I made a subtle Instagram post, a photo of me leaning against the vintage Mustang, coffee in hand, captioned, taking care of what's mine hot beverage automobile. I didn't tag him. I didn't tag her. But I knew their mutual friends followed me. It didn't take long before I got a follow request from Melissa herself, which I declined. By the end of week 2, Daniel's carefully curated life was unraveling. The house fund was gone. The car was out of his reach. His business was bleeding clients. And Melissa? Rumor had it she wasn't thrilled about funding every date night now that his disposable income had taken a nosedive. The funny thing about revenge is that it's not just about taking something back. It's about letting the other person sit in the reality they created. I didn't have to scream or beg or make a scene. I just removed myself from his world, piece by piece, until he was left with exactly what he'd chosen, a pretty face and an empty bank account. But I wasn't finished yet. There was one last thread to pull, the one that would really make him see what he'd lost. That thread was his reputation. Daniel had always been proud of his image as a self-made man. He'd give speeches at local business events about perseverance, hard work, and building success from the ground up. Never mind that half his ground had been laid by me. So, when I got an invitation to speak at one of those same events, on the topic of entrepreneurship and building a client base, I accepted without hesitation. When I walked on stage in my tailored navy dress, the room went silent. And there, 3 rows from the front, sat Daniel and Melissa. I didn't acknowledge them. Not directly. But I told the story of helping someone build their dream, only to be told you're replaceable. I didn't name names, but I didn't have to. Every person in that room knew exactly who I was talking about. By the time I finished, Daniel's face was pale, and Melissa's smile looked glued on. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. That night after the speech, I didn't expect to hear from him. I figured Daniel would swallow his pride, nurse his bruised ego in silence, and pretend none of it happened. But pride, I'd learned, was his fatal flaw. At 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. Daniel, you didn't have to humiliate me. Me, you didn't have to replace me. Daniel, you've ruined my business, my car, my savings. Why are you doing this? Me, I'm not ruining anything. I'm just taking back what's mine. The rest? That's you, Daniel. That's all you. There was no reply after that. And I didn't need one. It didn't take long for the cracks in their perfect relationship to show. My friend Laura had always been well-connected, and she kept me updated through the grapevine. Melissa had thought she was signing up for a man with a thriving business, a classic car, and a future of financial stability. What she got instead was a stressed, cash-strapped boyfriend with a thinning client list and no backup plan. According to Laura's source, Melissa began suggesting he sell some of his unnecessary possessions to free up money, which would have been great advice if he actually owned anything of significant value anymore. Apparently, he tried to get the Mustang back. He sent a formal letter, all lawyered up, demanding I return his car. I sent a copy of the registration papers to his attorney with a single sticky note attached. Possession is 9/10 of the law. The other 10th? Signed paperwork. Here's the part most revenge stories leave out, the part after the big takedown, when the dust settles and you're left with yourself. I had spent so many years building him up that I'd neglected my own ambitions. Now I had time, money, and no one to answer to. The first thing I did was use part of the Dream House fund to rent a small studio space for my design business. No more working at the kitchen table. I hired 2 freelancers to help with the client load I'd taken from Daniel and doubled my rates. People still paid happily, partly because I was good at what I did, partly because they were done with him. The Mustang? I had it restored to pristine condition. I didn't drive it every day, but I made sure it was parked outside my studio like a statement piece. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a reminder of everything I could reclaim. 3 months after the breakup, Daniel's business was on life support. I knew because one of his former clients, now mine, casually mentioned he was downsizing. Translation: his office lease was up, and he couldn't afford to renew it. Around that same time, Melissa apparently decided she was too young to be tied down. She left him. No big fight, no dramatic exit. Just a text and a clean block on all his social media. And here's the thing about people like Daniel: when they lose the audience, they lose themselves. His confidence wasn't self-sustaining. It was borrowed from the people who believed in him. Without me, without clients, without a girlfriend to admire him, there was nothing left to prop him up. I thought that would be the end of it, him fading into the background of my life, like a bad dream you finally forget. But one rainy Thursday, I got an email from him. Subject: can we talk? I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It wasn't an apology. Not really. He said he regretted how things ended and missed what we had. He talked about how Melissa wasn't who he thought she was, how his business had suffered without my support, how he wanted to start over. It was so predictable it almost bored me. I typed out a reply, then deleted it. Then I typed another one, shorter this time. Daniel, I didn't ruin your life. I just stopped building it for you. And I hit send. 1 month later, I was invited to be interviewed on a local podcast about women entrepreneurs. I talked openly, again without names, about investing your time and energy into people who see your worth, about reclaiming what's yours when someone tries to take it. When the episode aired, the feedback poured in. Women reached out to share their own stories of being the builder in someone else's success. Some of them cried. Some of them laughed. But they all understood. And that's when I realized the real revenge wasn't just in taking back the money, the car, or the clients. It was in becoming someone who didn't need to look back. Daniel still lives in the city. I see him sometimes, usually from a distance, at events or in traffic. We never speak. But last month, I caught him staring at me from across a cafe, his eyes darting to the keys of the Mustang sitting on my table. I smiled, finished my coffee, and walked out. Because the truth is, he didn't just lose me. He lost the best part of his world. And I took it with me. The funny thing about revenge is that people assume it's all fire and fury, screaming matches, grand confrontations, slammed doors. But the most devastating revenge isn't loud. It's silent. It's measured. It's the slow removal of oxygen from a room until the other person realizes they can't breathe without you.
And Daniel?
He was suffocating. After that final cafe sighting, I found myself reflecting on the months since I'd walked out. At first, I had been hyper-aware of him, checking mutual friends' social media, keeping an ear out for his name. But as my own life expanded, his presence shrank. I filled my calendar with client meetings, design workshops, and coffee dates with people who actually energized me. I redecorated my apartment, bold colors, art pieces I'd never been able to convince Daniel to hang because they were too busy. I bought a ridiculous velvet armchair for my reading nook, the kind he would have called impractical. The space was mine now, every inch of it a reflection of me. One evening, Laura called. "You're not gonna believe this," she said, and I could hear the smirk in her voice. Apparently, Daniel had started showing up at networking events again, but without his old confidence. The Mustang, the suit, the polished smile, all gone. He traded in tailored jackets for wrinkled button-downs, and his hair looked like he'd cut it himself in the mirror. "He's smaller," Laura said finally. "Like the air's gone out of him." I didn't gloat out loud, but inside, I felt that familiar click of satisfaction. A couple weeks later, I decided to take the Mustang for a spin. It had been sitting under its custom cover for a while, and the weather was perfect, crisp air, clear skies. Just enough sunlight to make the chrome gleam. I drove through the city, windows down, music low. Heads turned at every stoplight. It wasn't about showing off. It was about the fact that this car, which had once been his pride and joy, was now entirely mine, legally, financially, emotionally. At one intersection, I caught sight of him. He was crossing the street with a coffee in one hand, his phone in the other. His eyes flicked up just as I eased past him, the engine purring like it knew exactly who was passing. I didn't slow down, didn't wave,
Didn't even smile this time.
I just let the moment burn itself into his memory. One of the clients I'd taken from Daniel invited me to a dinner event, a small, exclusive gathering for local business owners. When I arrived, I noticed Daniel's name on the RSVP list. Part of me wanted to leave. Not out of fear, I wasn't afraid of him, but because I didn't want to waste energy on his presence. But another part of me, the part that had been underestimated for years, thought, no. I deserve to be here. I walked in wearing a sleek black dress and a quiet confidence that didn't need to be announced. Daniel was already seated at a table in the corner, laughing a little too loudly at something someone had said. Halfway through the evening, one of the organizers made an announcement about the most promising business growth stories of the year. They called my name. I stood, accepted the small plaque, and gave a brief thank you, highlighting my incredible clients, the growth of my studio, and the resilience it took to start fresh after a major personal and professional transition. I didn't look at him once during the speech, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see his hand tighten around his glass. That night, back at home, I drafted an email to Daniel. Something short, sharp, final. It read, "I'm not the better option. I'm the best one you ever had. You just didn't realize it until it was too late." I stared at it for a long time. My finger hovered over send. Then I deleted it. Because here's the truth he already knew. And sending it would only give him the satisfaction of a direct response. The real win was in my silence, in the fact that my life was so full, I didn't need to acknowledge him at all. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. Daniel was hosting some kind of business relaunch event. Glossy invitations, catered hors d'oeuvres, the works. At first, I laughed. Then I realized this was his way of proving he could still bounce back, that he wasn't beaten.
I didn't RSVP.
But I did send flowers to the venue on the day of the event, a beautiful arrangement of white lilies and deep red roses. The card read, "Congratulations on the restart. The one who built it first." By this point, the revenge wasn't even about getting back at him anymore. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I'd given away without realizing it. The parts that had believed my worth was tied to someone else's dreams. Daniel lost more than money, more than a car, more than clients. He lost the builder. And without the builder, the empire crumbled. When I think back to the early days with Daniel, it's almost like watching an old home movie, the kind with soft lighting and a faint hum in the background. I see myself sitting cross-legged on his apartment floor, surrounded by stacks of paperwork and coffee cups, helping him brainstorm ideas for his first business pitch. He'd pace the room, rattling off half-formed concepts while I jotted them down, smoothing out the rough edges. "That's good," I'd say, "but here's how you could make it better." Back then, I thought that was love, taking someone else's vision and pouring my energy into making it real. I thought it meant partnership. What I didn't realize was that I'd slowly been stepping into the role of architect while he got all the credit as owner. It was about a year into our relationship. He'd just landed his first major client, through a connection of mine, though he never quite acknowledged that part. At the celebratory dinner, the client praised his brilliant branding strategy, pointing out the elegant website and the cohesive marketing. Daniel smiled and said, "Yeah, I really worked hard on that." I remember the little sting in my chest. I'd been the one who stayed up until 2 a.m. 3 nights in a row coding that site from scratch. But I told myself it's fine. We're a team. His win is my win. Looking back, that was the first time I swallowed down my own accomplishments to keep his ego intact. That's why, when I started doing interviews and podcasts, I made a point to talk about my actual contributions. Not out of spite, but out of truth. I wanted people to know that women like me exist, the silent partners, the hidden hands that shape success from the shadows. And I wanted those women to hear, loud and clear, that they don't have to stay hidden. Every time I spoke publicly, I could feel a piece of myself locking back into place. I was rewriting the narrative, page by page, until Daniel's chapter became nothing more than a turning point in a much bigger story. One afternoon, I was leaving a client meeting downtown when I saw him again. This time, he wasn't in a cafe or at an event. He was sitting alone on a park bench, hunched over, scrolling aimlessly on his phone. I almost walked right past. But then he looked up. There was no flash of anger this time. No fake smile. Just recognition. The kind that says, I know exactly what I lost and I can't get it back. He didn't speak, and neither did I. We just held eye contact for a few seconds, long enough for me to register the absence of that confident energy he used to radiate. And then I walked away. My studio was thriving by now. I'd outgrown the original space and was in the process of moving into a larger office with 3 full-time employees. We were designing brand identities for companies all over the country, and my calendar was booked months in advance. The best part? Every single one of those clients was mine. No shared credit. No someone else standing in the spotlight while I stayed in the wings. I also started mentoring younger designers, mostly women, who wanted to start their own businesses. I told them about contracts, about protecting your intellectual property, about the importance of keeping your name on the work you create. And sometimes, when the conversation turned personal, I'd share just enough of my story to make the point. Never let someone convince you that your value is only in what you can give them. 6 months after the breakup, I got an email from a high-profile business summit in the city. They wanted me to lead a workshop on building a brand from the ground up. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was the kind of event Daniel used to dream about attending as a guest speaker. When the day came, I walked onto that stage with 0 nerves. The room was packed, and as I scanned the audience, my eyes caught on a familiar figure near the back.
Daniel.
He wasn't with anyone this time. No Melissa, no friends, just him. He watched me the entire time, his expression unreadable. I gave the best presentation of my career. I talked about strategy, design, marketing, but I also talked about resilience, about starting over when someone takes what you've built and tries to claim it as theirs. When it was over, the applause was so loud it almost startled me. People came up afterward to shake my hand, swap business cards, ask for advice. Daniel didn't approach me. He just left. Quietly. Driving home that night, it hit me. I had never actually wanted to destroy Daniel. That wasn't the point. The point was to make sure I wasn't erased from my own story. To take back what was mine, my money, my work, my pride, and then build something even bigger with it. Daniel had been my catalyst, but he wasn't my ending. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. I was running late for a lunch meeting and had ducked into a small coffee shop to escape the downpour. The place was half empty, the air rich with the scent of espresso and cinnamon. I shook the rain from my coat, ordered my drink, and turned toward the seating area. And there he was. Daniel sat alone in the corner, nursing a black coffee. His hair was longer than I'd ever seen it, curling at the ends. His suit jacket hung loose on his frame, and the sharp confidence that used to wrap around him like armor was nowhere in sight. We locked eyes, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then he gestured to the empty chair across from him. I could have ignored him. I could have walked out and left the moment to fade into nothing. But something in me, curiosity, closure, maybe both, made me cross the room. I sat. My coffee was still too hot to drink, so I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into my fingers.
He was the first to speak.
You look different, he said. Different good or different bad? I asked. Good, he admitted, and then his gaze dropped to the table. Better. The word hung there between us, heavy and unspoken in all the ways it connected back to her. I didn't ask you to sit here, so we could talk about how I look, I said finally. He leaned back, sighing. I need you to understand that I made a mistake. With Melissa. With everything. I raised an eyebrow. You're only just figuring that out now.
His jaw tightened.
I thought I wanted something new, something exciting. She made me feel alive again. I finished for him, my voice flat. He flinched. I wasn't alive with you anymore, he said quietly. We'd gotten so comfortable. I didn't realize how much you were doing for me until you weren't there. That's because you never thought you had to notice, I said. My voice didn't rise, but each word landed like a stone. You thought the builder would just keep building, no matter how little you gave back. He looked at me then, and I could see the regret in his eyes, raw, unpolished. I miss us, he said. I shook my head slowly. You don't miss us, Daniel. You miss the version of you that existed when I was holding everything together. You miss the safety net, the applause, the steady hand making sure you didn't trip over your own ambition. He swallowed, glancing toward the rain streaking the window. You really took everything, he said. No, I corrected. I took back what was mine. The rest? You lost that on your own. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft hiss of the espresso machine. He didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself. And that was when I knew the conversation was already over. He wasn't here to win me back, not really. He was here to soothe his own conscience. I'm not angry anymore, I said finally. He looked up, startled. I was. At first.
But now?
I'm grateful. You freed me from a role I never should have been in. You gave me the push to build something for myself instead of for you. His lips parted like he wanted to respond, but no words came out. I stood, slinging my bag over my shoulder. This is the last conversation we're ever going to have, Daniel. Not because I hate you, but because there's nothing left here. We're both just different people now, and I like the one I've become. As I left, I didn't look back. The rain had lightened to a mist, and the street glistened under the dull gray sky. I took a sip of my coffee, now cool enough to drink, and felt an unfamiliar calm settle in my chest. This wasn't the cinematic, fiery confrontation some people imagine when they think of revenge. It wasn't about shouting or watching him crumble. It was about the quiet certainty that I had won. Not because he'd lost, but because I'd walked away with my dignity, my success, and my life on my own terms. Months later, I'd hear snippets of his life through mutual acquaintances. He was still trying to rebuild his business, still chasing clients he'd lost, still searching for that magic spark he once thought came from a younger woman. I never felt the urge to insert myself into his story again. I didn't need to. He had his path, and I had mine. And mine? Mine was paved in the very bricks I once laid for him. Only now, they were building my own empire. It's strange how the sharp edges of a story soften over time. In the beginning, Every memory of Daniel felt jagged, dangerous to touch, capable of cutting deep. But now, months later, those same memories feel more like worn stones at the bottom of a river.
Smooth.
Harmless. When I think about him now, I don't see the man who betrayed me. I see the man who unknowingly handed me the keys to my own freedom. One Friday afternoon, I was in my new office, sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, my team laughing in the background as they debated where to order lunch. My desk was stacked with sketches, color swatches, and proposals for 3 major upcoming projects. It hit me then. This is what I'd been working toward all along. Not the clients I'd taken from Daniel. Not the Mustang parked in the private garage downstairs. Not even the financial stability that meant I'd never again have to depend on someone else to include me in their vision. It was the independence. The unshakable confidence that came from building something entirely on my own. I leaned back in my chair, letting my eyes travel over the walls, filled with art I'd chosen, photos from travels I'd taken, and a framed quote that had become my quiet mantra. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. That same afternoon, an email popped into my inbox from a name I recognized instantly. Melissa. The subject line was simple. I think I owe you an apology. I opened it, curiosity piqued. She explained that she'd left Daniel months ago and had since learned just how much I'd been the one behind his success. She admitted she believed his version of our breakup at first, that I'd been holding him back, but over time, she realized he'd been using her the same way he'd used me. Her words weren't defensive, just honest. She ended the email with, I hope you're doing well. I guess I just wanted you to know I understand now. I didn't reply. Not because I was bitter, but because some chapters don't need a sequel. People always think revenge is about the other person, that it's about making them pay or watching them squirm. And sure, there's a certain satisfaction in reclaiming what's yours and watching them face the consequences of their own actions. But the truth? The real revenge is building a life so good, you don't have to think about them at all. Daniel will likely always remember me as the woman who walked out without a word and took the best of his world with her. And maybe, in his own way, he'll regret it. But I'll remember myself as the woman who finally realized she was the best and didn't need his recognition to prove it. If you've ever been underestimated, replaced, or told you weren't enough, I want you to remember this. Sometimes the best closure you can get is not an apology, not an explanation, not even a confession that they were wrong. Sometimes, the best closure is looking around at your life and realizing you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed them in the first place. I closed my laptop, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. Outside, the late afternoon sun lit the street in gold. I slipped into the driver's seat of the Mustang, the leather warm against my hands, the engine purring to life. As I pulled out of the garage, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, calm, steady, and smiling. I wasn't driving away from the past anymore. I was driving towards something entirely mine. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest revenge of all. If you've ever had someone underestimate you, or walk away thinking they could replace you, tell me your story in the comments. Like this video if you believe the best revenge is living. Well, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories where justice isn't just served, it's delivered with style. Until next time.